I am unashamed. What about you?
So, Dad, it's June. Usually you have some reports along the way about the land, the water regime, or is there a season now, or are you waiting it out, or what are you doing?
This is a low water year. Last year
First one in 5 years, right?
Last year was a low water year. It got up to about 34, 35, which is about 15 feet rise on the river.
Yep.
This year, it got up to about 30, 31, 32 in there.
40 is flood stage here.
Just pushing in on the duck hole. So now we've got it all ready to drain out. We're waiting on we're going to plant the muck. The muck is all the water that's in the backwater. When you drain a swampland, it's just solid silt. It's silt.
Yep.
It's just muck.
Filled with snakes and
mosquitoes, alligators, all that.
It's
so
dangerous.
we're gonna drain it all.
Everything out there now wants to hurt you.
We're gonna drain this week, and as soon as we drain it, and as soon as the muck appears, when the water comes off, we take 4-wheelers with cedars on the back, and we just spray all that muck. Then we'll drain it down a couple more days. We move down, so we just plant it as we drain. You drain it and you plant it. And
so the silt is your fertilizer.
It's a fertilizer. We're not buying fertilizer because it's $100 a bag.
Because of the Ukraine, I never knew this till this war happened, is 75% of the world's fertilizer comes from Ukraine. I didn't know that. So they can't, obviously they're not, providing it because they're in a war.
This political structure we now have is the worst I have ever seen in my 76 years on the earth.
Pretty bad. So, but
pitiful.
Luckily for you, Dad, and us, the Almighty has provided fertilizer.
Yep.
By way of the Ouachita River.
That is correct.
And so you're using that to your advantage.
If you don't plant it before the Almighty plants it, he'll bring it down, and he'll put what he thinks ought to be out there. And sometimes
so are you doing something?
Sometimes ducks don't like what he puts out there.
Now look, you bring up an interesting thought, and
that took a turn. I didn't know.
I was studying this because you famously have said that you're a low tech man in a high tech world.
That is correct.
But something hit me the other night. So when God made Adam and Eve, I may be going out here on this.
Oh boy, here we go.
I could be wrong.
It's a long way from.
I wish I'd have worn my
long way from silt, but go ahead.
God, no, we're getting there.
Yeah.
He made Adam. He had this statement because Genesis 1 is kind of a creation narrative, but then Genesis 2 is kind of like a lot of scholars say. Well, it's the same creation narrative.
Yeah, he just focuses on the humans.
Yeah, so it's a dual creation story there.
Yeah.
But he says he took the man to work the ground and subdue it. Well, there's your birthplace of technology.
Yep.
Think about it. Because he had to say, okay, well, I need an efficient way to do this. And, when you get to chapter 4 or 5 there, you get into the actual farming, and they were making tools. Now they were making them for violence. And so it was, God had technology in mind from the beginning. Because that's, if you read the definition of science and technology, it's basically coming up with a way to be the most efficient with what you have to work with, right?
Correct.
So, but that led me, because I kind of chuckled when I thought about it, because Phil always said, no technology. But the more I got to thinking about that, I heard a sermon one time talking about technology, and basically the thrust of it was on some book that somebody read, that it's kind of like anything else. It's what you use it for. But the problem when you put all your hopes and dreams in technology is there's no moral consideration.
Correct.
In that. That's the problem.
Right.
If you're totally relying on that, so my point is you can come up with a way to be more efficient, but it doesn't necessarily tell you whether you should do that.
Correct.
Because what if your goal, whatever makes you happy or whatever your goal is if you find the most efficient way to do that, well, what if it's killing 10,000 people?
Right.
Well, but technology doesn't consider that. You would just come up with a way to do it. So I think when we get
Which
on,
is why technology is on the same level as the theory of evolution, because the people that came up and believed the theory of evolution say the same thing. It's just survival of the fittest.
right.
In other words, there's no morality. If you have to die so that someone stronger than you can live, that's what we do.
But my point is, don't blame technology when they give you a cell phone and you're like, well, I mean, they made it where I could do this. You still have a moral obligation to the creator of the universe to make wise decisions, no matter what you have in your hand and no matter what you're going to do. And that's the problem when you take all this technology, because look, we've come up with some incredible things, especially in the last 20 years. I mean, just incredible. But we're so reliant on it. I mean, there's actually people out there that think that death is a technology problem. They're like, at some point, we'll figure out technology to where we won't die.
Yep.
I mean, you're talking about delusion.
They're working on trying to make us immortal instead of God.
But I also know the thing, you're
If
right.
you put your hope on that, guess what's going to happen to you? You're going to die while they're trying to figure it out.
Another irony about your thing with Dad and the idea of technology in the land is that, I don't know, Dad, if you added up the value of the equipment that's within about 100 yards of where we're sitting right here in this podcast studio,
Yeah,
it would be a lot, right?
it'd be about $1 million worth.
$1 million worth of stuff.
Whoa.
And that's track hoes and tractors and spreaders and planters. They even came up with, the people that do our side-by-sides came up with a side-by-side that runs on tracks that I don't know that they've ever done one for anybody other than you. Maybe they have.
Well, they make it for a few people, but if
So you can plant.
if you have tracks instead of wheels, your tracks won't bury down in the mud.
Right. You won't get
Just
stuck.
go along on
Do
top
you know
of
what's
it.
in those those tractors now? Computers.
Oh,
Chips.
tell me about it.
So you're
That's the first things the rats eat.
Yeah.
So we go in there, we got mothballs in little bags.
yeah.
Put them in there, and they smell. Them rats do. Whoo, get out of here. So
So
They eat the
actually-
wiring.
it's fighting rats.
Actually,
it's
from
spraying
from a financial perspective, you're way more technological than me. Because that phone only costs about, what do they cost now?
About $1,000.
$1,000.
Yeah. This phone, they've got ways to do stuff and all that, but trial and error is what I use. So we know what kind of feed ducks like the best. So sometimes the Almighty will give us a great crop of sprangle top, but we've noticed that if you have millet there that's flooded, more ducks will come on the millet than the sprangle top.
Right.
So we say
You're not really going against the Almighty. You're just
No.
bringing some of his stuff from somewhere else.
He
here.
set,
Well,
he
you're
set the
using-
parameters on when we drain it, when we plant it, and how we do that, how we put water on it. We just work around what he's doing, but we're very aware.
So I didn't.
But my point was, Phil, you're not looking at the tractor asking it whether you should look lustfully at a woman.
No,
Well, and as ridiculous as that sounds, but people do that
Yeah.
with a phone,
Right.
or
Yeah, computer.
some other piece of.
you work on the
Technology.
land and live in the woods, and you operate based the format on what God has given you from year to year. Some years wet years, some years dry years. We have decided we've done it trial and error. We say, okay, this year we got a pretty dry year. We'll be planting by June. A lot of times it's August before the water comes out. Long backwater. Well, that determines what we plant. Can't get out there because it's flooded.
Right.
All I do is manipulate water, and a lot of it.
So I didn't know we were going to open with this because
I didn't either.
I never know what we're going to open with. But Jace, you brought up an interesting point, which I like that in Genesis 2, technology birthplace. So I'm speaking this week. By the time this airs, it will have already happened. But I'm speaking this week. I was asked to come to Washington, D.C., and I'm already going to be out speaking anyway, to speak at a conservative environmental conference. Because you think about environmentalism, most time we always think left-wingers and all that.
Yep.
But there's a large group of young conservative people. And when I say conservative, politically, that are also concerned about conservation and taking care of the planet, which so are we. The guy reached out to me and said, "Would you come and talk about how that hunters and fishermen, by nature, most of them are conservationists, which we are."
Oh yeah.
And so I got Dan to take a picture of on the wall here. There's a picture of our property from a high viewpoint, and which shows the whole thing. So I'm going to show that at this conference because God blessed us to be able to have property. But what you have done, and now we're in your footsteps because Stone and us will be the next generation, then beyond that, is that we want this property to be exactly what God intended it to be, a paradise of wildlife, and us to be able to enjoy that and be a part of that. And so if everybody had their parcel, had the same mindset, the earth would be a pretty good place.
Plus,
but look at all the work you put into it.
A lot of the things we have nothing to do with it. It's just as simple as walk out there and a little blow will come by, thunderstorm, and I'll see a limb that broke off and it hit the ground. Well, it's a willow oak limb. So I said, let me just look at something. So beginning in June, mid-June, going into July, I see a limb on the ground. I ease over on that, stop my four-wheeler. I walk over there and look at that, and I take that limb, and sometimes it's like that, and I roll that limb around. I look, I said, well, what do you know? I said, I see a lot of acorns. Well, last year I looked at the limbs, and there were no acorns, very few. So our wood duck population was way down, no food supply. Large, 1,600 acres, but no acorns on the trees. Well, that affects the deer, how much food they have, food supply, the ducks. It affects everything. So this year remains to be seen, but I've never seen 2 years in a row where the acorns weren't there.
It could have been a warning that somebody close to this property might have done something wrong.
That's right. It needs to repent. So my point, Jase,
Judgment.
My point, and I don't have long to speak, but I went back to Genesis 2 in the same place you did, and which I like your thought. I may add that now that you've told me that.
I have more.
I need more. That Genesis 2 is also, that same context is the birthplace of conservation. Because the man came here, and before he ever had a wife.
And technology and science.
That's right, and
science. But here's where my argument, here's where, I wasn't going to do this, but since you brought it up, here's where it leads. So if the technology gurus say that is the answer to all, and I've already explained the problem with it,
right,
is it doesn't have a moral basis. Technology doesn't factor in what you're trying to be efficient for. It just says, here's how you do it. We still have to decide some other way whether we should do this, whether it's right or wrong.
Correct.
Yep.
So my point is, if that's the technology way, where people who affix that as the answer to all, one day we'll be able to figure out all the world's problems and end world hunger based on technology, because that's what people think.
Yep.
Well, they're going to the future, but I'm going in the past. How could you have technology pre-Genesis 2 without a technician?
Mm-hmm.
Where did because the earth
Somebody
was
had
formed.
to start it.
So, there was technology set in motion when you start building planets.
Mm-hmm.
That had to take some technology. I mean, you have it just the right distance from the sun. You have water. You have it with all the components.
You have all these different soils. We call
different soils for different purposes.
Gumbo. I mean, it's like it's a particular. It's not like sandy.
No.
Up on some ridges you get a little sandy, but down in the swamp part,
different.
That silt, you get a whole different.
So where's the
regime of vegetation? I mean, your vegetation. We go out there and say, whatever we put here, we need to put it here for a food supply for squirrels, ducks, deer. We said we're aware of all these different species that depend on it. So we try to make it.
So I propose.
Hang on, Jace. Let's take a break. So, Jace, you had you cut your own hair recently. We talked about that on the podcast.
I did. And my beard.
And your beard, So,
talent.
Yeah, you're looking all spiffy now.
It's a good problem.
So you have hair, which is good, and Jace cuts his own hair. Some of you guys out there, though, may be experiencing hair loss, and you may be doing it at a young age. And so one of our sponsors has been with us the whole time we've been on the air, is a company called Keeps. And the reason they're called Keeps is they help you keep your hair, which is really good, especially you got that early male pattern baldness going on. They have a clinically proven, FDA-approved hair treatment, and it's all available online. They have a physician available that's also there 24/7 if you have any questions about anything. No waiting rooms, no pharmacy visits. It comes straight to your door at about half the cost. So if those balding jokes are wearing thin, join thousands of guys who have saved their hair. Go to keeps.com/door. You're going to get 50% off your first order. KEEPS.com/door. Keeps.com/door.
I propose the technology came from the technician that has a lot of skills,
A lot of truth in
certain
that.
set of skills that would be God Almighty, who also, by the way, has the moral compass by which men should live by, in that it's pure, just.
And they have an open denial of the technician. He's not there. That's it. There is no God. So we're looking at it like, oh, there's a God, there's a creator. And we work within the parameters when it comes to trees, bushes, grasses. We study the whole thing from start to finish.
Jace makes a good point. The techno lords have tried to replace the ultimate technician with their technology.
It's Mother Earth.
Or that.
Well, the technoloords cannot achieve the objective because of the lack of morality that only Jesus as Lord provides.
But you know what's interesting, Jay? So you got shows.
Father God has been replaced by Mother Earth.
Yeah, that's a
Bad move.
So you look at the shows like Star Trek and all those, which the idea was we would eventually evolve to a place with technology, yet we would solve all of our problems that we have now, or when that show was first made in the 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever. But you know what's interesting? The shows always have to have the same tension in them. So guess what? The whole time they're fighting wars. They're bombing out planets. Now it's just a bigger scale of destruction. You see what I'm saying? I mean, you take the same.
You have
This
to
right
have
here-
the moral compass.
This right here depends on God and how the soil, the water, the rains, the droughts, the storms. You say you have to operate under what he gives you.
You think about schools now today. I mean, now, especially since the pandemic, think of the technology. Even the public school that we went to, they all had to buy each student a computer during the coronavirus.
Yeah.
Because you had to be able to go online. So you're thinking, well, that's fascinating that we've reached a place in our existence that we're that sophisticated. Well, what's the problem with schools? When there's still no moral compass, especially since God has been removed.
That's it.
So all the technology in the world's not going to matter if there's no moral way to address people's lives and instill in
Look,
them
not only that,
the values.
to prove your point even more, all that technology was poured into it. Schools are upgraded to try to help them be, less virus, and all this stuff, and better air circulation. But they're proving it now, because now you're looking at the results. All that technology, Jason, all those computers, guess what? Educational disaster. Scores plummeted. People have dropped it, just didn't even go back to school.
Well, you know why? Because not only, if you take out God as far as the moral compass, it actually, these are what people have written about it, and, they're godly men. But when you think about what technology does, and it does a lot of good things, but it also separates us from the actual earth, because you could be planning technology so much to where you never are experiencing the earth itself other than what you're looking at and typing. And you thought, well, nobody would do that. Oh, there's people been in their basement for days, weeks, and months. They hadn't even seen the sun.
Yeah.
So what are they doing? Well, they're on a computer. They're on on a technology.
Now we're back to your metaverse deal.
Well, then when you get to the social platforms and all, it actually, that alienated you from other people.
Yeah.
It just gave you a mirage that you were interacting.
You're quoting scripture, although they claim to be wise, Jace. As far as technology goes, they really have. They became fools. They exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal man, birds, animals, and reptiles. Therefore, he gave them over to the sinful desires of their hearts, to sexual impurity, for the degrading of their bodies with one another. They exchanged, here's the deal with technology, they exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and they worshiped and served created things rather than the Creator. That's where we are.
Well, but you got to remember, technology
Like you say, they got rid of the technician, Jace.
Technology is a good thing as long as you adhere that there is a technician, because it was God's plan all along. But when you take God out of the equation, when there's no technician, then all of a sudden the moral fiber breaks down, and then the relationships break down, which is what it always comes back to. That relationship with the Father trickles into a relationship with our family and the community, and so you can use this together. But you take God out of it.
And you're going to have to, our audience out here, because we got a lot of young people who are very tech savvy. I'm telling you, you're going to have to be a policeman in your house with your children, especially about what Jace was just talking about. Last night, Lisa comes in. I'm working on this. I'm working on our podcast. So I'm on my computer working, studying. And so all my grandkids are there. They're all on a device. One of them's on my phone. One of them's on an iPad. And they're playing these games, and they're all interactive. So Lisa walks in. She's like, everybody, all devices right here. She just walks in the room, and everybody piles them up there. And she says, everybody outside. We're not going to play like we're playing outside on a computer. Go play outside. And so, she's basically saying, we're not going to play like we're playing. Go out and play. But if you don't make that effort, they'll just lock into that world, and they'll just live there.
Yeah.
And they won't go play outside. They won't go and experience the thing. So guess what? They're out there playing baseball, then they were playing basketball, then they went swimming. And I thought, you have to make an effort to be able to do that, and not just say, well, my kids are quiet because they're on a computer or a phone. They need to be active. That's how we're made. Enjoy the earth. Be a part of it. You're right. I couldn't agree with that more.
So, I think we get a bad reputation. It's not bad. It's only bad when you've detached the creator of the universe from this privilege that we're able to do.
And that's why we're using it to do what we're doing with the Unashamed podcast. So before we get back to Hebrews, I want to share. So, Dad, your book, Your Daily Fill, which is a devotional book, it's got 100 devotionals in here that are coming from some of the books you have written. It did so well when they released it on a short release, just to Walmart only, that now they're releasing it nationally.
Yep.
So I want to mention it to folks because you can get it at Amazon, Hobby Lobby, Books A Million, Barnes & Noble, ChristianBook.com. You may want to check this out. And I know this is releasing right before Father's Day, so it may be too late for that. But if not, it'd be a great Father's Day gift. Really some good stuff in here.
Oh, if that was put in the hearts and minds of America, just that little book right there.
Yep.
It's short. Each topic is not over a page and a half, 2 pages.
That's right.
So it's not like you're trying just turn from one to the other. The days go by, and everything in there is positive.
It's about 4 months of devotional, and it comes from the themes of the books you've written, from theft and Jesus politics. So it's a great gift idea. Just letting you know about that. I try to let you guys know, Unashamed Nation, because I know you enjoy that. So check it out if you hadn't already gotten that. Your Daily Fill, which I thought's clever, Jace. Your Daily Fill.
Yeah.
Fill or PHIL.
No, it's good. The material. He had a good source for the material.
He did.
Which is what we're doing.
In the picture, he's right out there on the land.
Yep.
And there's a log, and the source of the material is in his right hand.
That's exactly right.
A hurricane blew that log down.
Did it really?
It blew it down.
How did it cut it? Looks like a saw.
Well, we cut it up to use it for firewood.
Oh, okay.
The wind blew it down.
Jace, have you started cutting your firewood yet?
I did. I started yesterday, and the neighbors all gathered around. You got to remember, when you live around yuppies, when you go grab a chainsaw and start
night.
this is must see. They come and gather. I thought, what are they doing? They're just watching. It's exciting. So,
So that was the neighborhood.
which is my point about technology. We have a chainsaw, and we're one of the trees that blew down the last storm. We took a hit in our neighborhood, but they all gathered up in between my neighbor and I. And,
When you live in Louisiana, especially through hurricane season, chainsaw is a vital thing to have. You talk about technology that you need because there's so many trees around here. Once they start falling down, you couldn't even leave here if you didn't.
Well, it's so funny that
It took an hour and a half it took 3 or 4 hours to cut my way out. But I was just trying to help the energy people.
Right. So
I said, at least you can drive down the road. It was just like this, tree after tree after tree.
Well, I cut them out off of our road.
That's exactly why I love where we live. Let's take another break. So one of our newer sponsors, I think we've mentioned them a time or two before on the Unashamed podcast, is called Eden Pure Thunderstorm. And the idea behind this is that it provides that same smell that you get after a thunderstorm. You know, that ozone type smell that you smell? It provides that for your home. So it quickly destroys viruses, odors, mold, a lot of things that happen. This would be good in your house because you've had a few issues going on. We've actually got one plugged in here into the lair. And so we're enjoying it right here as we do our podcast. So it vanishes those smells. It smells like that thunderstorm has come through and cleared it out. They've already sold over 250,000, so it works. Right now you can save $200 on an Eden Pure Thunderstorm 3-pack for the whole home protection. And that's what we have. We have them in our home. You'll get 3 units for under $200. So that's a fraction of the cost compared to other air purifiers that can go as much for $600 a piece. So check these guys out with this special offer. You're getting 3 units for under $200. Go to EdenPureDeals.com. Put in the discount code Phil to save that $200. That's EdenPureDeals.com. Use the discount code Phil and shipping is free.
It's
so funny that my next door neighbor acquired all the trees that had fallen, which I thought, they just gave them to him, but he bought some of them. So some of my neighbors that I won't mention which ones actually sold him the trees for firewood. And so I was like, boy, you got your work cut out for you. He said, well, I thought we could do is you cut them up and I'll get my boys and they'll have us firewood. So I was like, oh, okay. So he bought the trees.
Yep.
I cut them up.
Yep.
And the boys distribute. It's a pretty good deal for
Not a
both
bad
of
deal.
us, I think.
Yeah, those are good boys.
Yeah.
So we're back to Hebrews. We're just kind of still setting up the book.
Well, you listed, I think we're up to 7 things now that we
7
said.
key thoughts. And in the overtime, I only talked about one, the word impossible.
Well, we had faith and perfect. I thought you had perfect on there somewhere.
No, I didn't have perfect.
We need perfect.
Yeah,
'cause that's
faith,
in there
perfect,
a lot.
and better were the 3 I mentioned on the last podcast.
Better, yeah. And then you brought up impossible in the overtime, and I brought up impossible's cousin, which is, this is not a cousin to be taken lightly. This is not a player to be named later like it didn't matter. And just to bring people up to speed where we left off, there's an illustration that's quite clever about Melchizedek in Hebrews 7. I mean, maybe we'll get to that in detail on who he was, but I propose that he was in the Jewish world, because here's these Jewish Christians who are being tempted to go back to the old system,
the old covenant.
We had a list. I gave a list of the old covenant versus the new covenant, and I can give that again. But I brought up that Hebrews 6, or is it 7? Yeah, chapter 7. And verse 16, the cousin of impossible would be, because Jesus was better, there's your word, than Melchizedek, because he became a priest, this is 7:16 of Hebrews, not on the basis of a regulation as to his ancestry, And if you think about that, it's a powerful, because what is Jesus' ancestry? Well, you can follow in Matthew and Luke, you have one that goes back to God and one that goes back
Abraham.
to Abraham, which is, he was the son of man and the son of God.
Correct.
But it was not based on a regulation as to his ancestry, but on the basis of the power of an indestructible life.
Right.
The only time I believe the word indestructible is
I
used
think you're right.
in the Bible. But when you think about impossible, I mean, Jesus is better because he's indestructible.
Yeah.
I mean, just think about our Lord and say, when somebody, that's why it always kind of irks me when people cower down, or they're nervous about having Jesus conversations, or they don't want to be, or they're ashamed of their faith, or they're like, well, man, I should say something, but I'm not. And I mean, we follow one who is better because he's indestructible.
Yep, you got that. And then a better hope, 2 verses below that, 19. A better hope is introduced by which we draw near to God. Then just below there, others became priests without an oath, but he became a priest with an oath, which God said to him, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You, Jesus, are a priest forever. Because of this, and he's back on it again, Jesus has become, this is the third time it's mentioned, the guarantee of a better covenant.
Yep.
3 times, boom, boom, boom.
Yeah. And 11 total in the whole book, which you talked about.
Well, that's why when he said that we have better promises, which verse was that we read? That was one of them. I think it was 7 or 8 that you mentioned.
Yeah, 8:6.
8:6. So when you look at the Old Covenant versus New Covenant, the point he was trying to make, I mean, here's these people trying to go back under the Old Covenant because that was their heritage. And that was
what the human race was trying to do, Jesus had to do for us.
Exactly. And I gave some reasons at the end of the last podcast, which I think, I'll run through them real quick again because I think they're important. The Old Covenant was a shadow, and Jesus obviously was the reality and the substance in the New Covenant. That's why his promises are better. And you have the verses like, it's not yes and no, because that would be under the old law. In Jesus, what is that, 2 Corinthians 1? Mm-hmm. It's always yes.
Yeah.
I mean, what a statement. It's because his promises are better. The Old Covenant was temporary. The New Covenant was permanent. And I'd venture to say eternal.
Yep.
Because it gives us the thought of having a forever family. The mediator was Moses under the Old Covenant. The high priest was Aaron. The priests were only Levites. Well, in Christ, the mediator is Christ. The high priest is Christ. And the priests are all who follow Jesus. Everybody.
Right.
You don't have to have a certain garb or be from a certain tribe. You can be from anywhere. The Old Covenant, no matter how you dial it up, imperfection came out of it. Man could not keep the law. The New Covenant is you have perfect because Jesus was the perfect sacrifice for it. He became sin for us. The Old Covenant was abolished, and because the New Covenant, Jesus fulfilled it. And I mean, it's still, like Phil says a lot, these principles were good, and it's not like we don't use them and take the principles out of them that God intended, but you're never going to be
The law
perfect.
wasn't the problem. We are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but Jesus fulfilled it through love, and the Old Covenant, you entered it by natural birth, so you didn't really have a choice. You just looked up, you're in.
Correct.
In the New Covenant, you enter by spiritual birth. You're born again.
Mm-hmm.
And
By choice, by the way.
Yeah, by choice. And the Old Covenant was for Jews only, and the New Covenant was for all nations.
Yep.
Way better.
It's better.
Way better.
Which was when Jesus did the Great Commission, right? That was one of the last things he said before he left the planet. He made that transition, go into the world, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them what I've commanded you. The idea is all nations.
Well, like Mark said,
Every
preach the gospel to every nation.
That's right. in their own language.
Well, that was a big deal saying that because
right.
they're like, well, wait a minute, we're the nation chosen by God.
Right.
So we don't think that's a big deal, but to them that would be a good. Why are we preaching to every nation? We're the ones that are in.
And I think Dad had made that point in the overtime. Let's take another break. I think you'd made that point in the overtime about we were trying to figure out some of the reasons why the Jewish people, even to this very day in 2022, are so hated by so many people around the world. And I don't know if it's that idea about that, Jase, or they think they're the only ones, or what it is. I next time we have Bowles on, though, I am going to ask him a question because I thought about this after we had him on last night. Because he mentioned that, mostly he's working with people coming out of the Islamic faith.
Middle East.
In the Middle East. But he mentioned something yesterday that struck me later. I didn't think about it in the moment, or I would have asked him on air, that they accept the Old Testament and they even accept Jesus as a prophet.
Well, I noticed that when I was there.
Yeah.
Because he said, because I said, well, what, when I got up and spoke, my speech was being
translated.
Well, yeah, translated into
Farsi.
Persia. Yeah, Farsa in Persia. And I'm not sure how they were getting it to these underground churches or whatever.
Right.
But I was like, well, should I even give the New Testament?
Yeah.
And he's like, yes. I mean, just introduce Jesus. He said, but they'll be familiar with the Old Testament. So when he said that, I thought, well, that's strange.
Yeah.
So I guess they're.
Well, my assumption has always been, this is why I want to ask him, because I'm not sure, and he knows these people, so he'll know the answer to the question. I've always assumed it went back to Abraham's line, because you had Isaac and Ishmael. And Ishmael wound up being the father of many of those places now that are in the Middle East.
Abraham is the father of not only the Christians, but the Arabs. The
Correct. So I'm assuming that's why they would embrace the Old Testament.
Yep.
So
we have the same father, which is amazing.
But here's my question based on that is because you mentioned about the people that hate. Bless you, Josh. The people that hate them, I thought the most vitriol on the planet towards the Israeli people.
That's a big part of it.
Is right there.
Yep.
I mean, let's face it, the biggest
They
fear.
chose Muhammad over Jesus.
Yeah, I guess so. And maybe it goes back to even Isaac and Ishmael.
The Jews rejected him, but there's a lot of jealousy there involved.
There's a lot of vitriol between the Arab world and the Jews. I mean, it's way stronger than.
But it's not uncommon with that. That's the way people identify themselves even today.
I guess so.
If you're different,
but what I'm saying is, Jay, doesn't it seem strange that you would share history with certain amount of
when Ishmael
and yet have that much hatred towards each other? I don't know. It just
when Ishmael was born, the last thing it says about him is that, and he lived in hostility toward all his brothers.
That's right.
I talked to a Jewish guy one time, and I showed him that, and he said, "I've never seen that before. I've never seen that one."
But I think that was God's plan going back to the Tower of Babel. Everybody spoke the same language, and they were accomplishing great things. But the plan was, because of our evil and our sin, was to bring Jesus on the earth and bring everybody together. So when when God, or through Jesus, you can't say one without the other, but when the languages were confused, those differences that then occurred,
yeah.
We would have never thought that would have been the point of conflict for the rest of the earth.
That's right.
Because if you're different than me, I'm not going to like you. There's going to be fringes on all groups of people that don't like the other fringes, and I'm saying that as far as using the word hate. There's just going to be people that hate each other because they're different.
And it is interesting that in our short history as a country, you go about every 100 years and you realign with who's a friend and who's an enemy. We fought a war with Japan and Germany, and now we're allies. We're on the same side.
But what my point is,
now it's China and Russia.
When we look at the difference in the Old Covenant and the New Covenant, where you only had to be from a certain tribe to be a priest, to be all that, and it was only for the Jews. Well, when you look at what God did through Jesus in the New Covenant, well, that was the way to bring people together.
Yep.
And don't take for granted that fulfilling the law, which he fulfilled it through love.
Yeah.
And what is the whole problem with being different? Hate, because you have one group. Well, everybody's
Yep.
going to hate them because they're the one group.
Right.
That's what we've been doing in our societies since the beginning of time. What
And
do
that
we
may
do?
be
One
what-
group goes to war against another group,
Yeah.
and they get all their stuff, and they make slaves out of them or whatever. They take all their gold, and then they move on to the next group. And even the church, especially in the 16 and 1700s, they were warring on which church was going to be the church of each nation. I mean, tens of thousands of people died
Yeah.
in a religious war over that. We're only going to have one church. Well, I think it ought to be this church. Well, it's going to be this church. Well, let's fight about it.
Yeah. Or the idea that all the crusades where they went in and said, you either die or convert.
All right.
I mean, that's not exactly what Jesus had in mind, I don't think.
That's why, we're seeming to give simplistic things that people say, oh, well, we know this. But when you look at the history of humanity, they haven't been living in general, the focus of these letters, which was to bring people together under Jesus.
Right.
No matter where you're from, what you did, who you think you are, what system you came from, here Jesus is the new way, and it's better.
It's better. And it does bring unity. Let's take our last break.
So what's your other
So
theme?
we
that's
had,
four of them.
so we had better, we had impossible, we had faith and perfect that we added in from your list. The next one I had, and I don't have any stuff on it, but it was just a key word, is remember. Dad mentioned that several times. The whole point of the book is to try to get people to remember what the first part was about.
What do you mean the first?
I mean the old covenant.
Oh, well,
so I mean it's all a big walk down memory lane.
Well, I do think it's interesting that he used a lot of the rituals, like the sacrifices, the regulations, the law, as shadows to who Jesus is. But then he gets to Hebrews 11, and it's like he just picked the people out who were famous. I mean, look, when you start talking about Moses to those people in this setting, they're like, well, wait a minute now. If you have some ideas about how we should change some rituals, we're open. I mean, you can explain Jesus.
When you go after the pillars,
don't be talking about Moses. Which you remember the conversation in John 8 when they were that was that over Abraham. Yeah. When it's the same thing. I mean, Jesus was lighting them up. I mean, saying your father's the devil, and I mean they were people.
They said our father's Abraham. What are you talking about?
They're like, wait a minute, and
then he drops the mic on him before Abraham was born.
Which we went over the difficulty in them transitioning, but you have this chapter, the Hall of Fame chapter in Hebrews 11, and I mean he goes through. There's a long list, and look, part of us when you look into the details of some of these people on this list, you're like, well, how'd they make it in that list?
Yeah.
And, I just think that there's something in there about him subliminally for us today. God's grace reaches way beyond what we can even conceive. I mean, no matter where you're from, or when we say no matter what you did, I mean, he proves that right here. Some of these people that made the Hall of Fame made terrible decisions and were utterly sinful. And you would just never think that's your example.
Right.
I'm sure it made them mad.
Yeah.
In some capacity.
That's why I love that Rahab made that list, which she's also in the genealogy of Christ in Matthew. I mean, this is a woman who was a prostitute, when they ran up on her.
You talking about old writings when Ishmael was born from Abram and Sarah. Remember that his wife couldn't have children, so that's the way he came along. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. He will be a wild donkey. The King James said a wild ass of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. Just think about now what's fixing to take place. And he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. That's Genesis 16, the last part of Genesis 16. You turn over to when he started having children in Genesis 25, it's the final word for all of it. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael, who was a wild ass of a man. Right down there toward the bottom, and Ishmael's children, sons, they lived in hostility toward all their brothers. So Ishmael did it, and so did they. That's why I ask you, where's all this hatred coming from? Well, some of it's coming from this right there.
Yeah.
It says they will live in hostility toward all their brothers, Ishmael and his children, and those are two great nations.
Right.
What it was, some ites, a couple.
Oh, there's a lot of ites in there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
A lot of ites. Well, it's funny, and I mentioned this before. One of the greatest grace things, I said something about Rahab a minute ago. You remember the story back when Lot came out, but then he winds up, remember, he thinks they're the last people on the planet because they've suffered. Sodom and Gomorrah were just wiped out. And so he winds up getting drunk and having sex with his daughters, and they have kids by him, which is kind of a sordid story. But those two kids were Moab and Ammon, which were some of those ites you were talking about, Dad, Moabites, Ammonites. And God had always said, he told the Hebrews, don't have anything to do with those two nations. And it went back to that original idea of how they were originated in sin. But you know what's interesting, Jay? So Ruth comes out of that the Moab line, and then Rahab comes out of the Ammon line. And so two of the women that are mentioned in Jesus' genealogy, because they were part of that tree you talked about as the Son of Man, were from those two nations. And I've always thought that was such a great picture of grace, because here were people that God has said don't associate with, but ultimately some of their people were wound up in that same physical lineage of Jesus, which shows you that you can always be redeemed. I mean, there's no place you can't come back from. So, and look, again, did that happen by accident? No. God was trying to show us that. That's why their genealogy.
Well, I like it how he tied the knot in the end of Hebrews 11, saying they were all commended for their faith, yet they didn't even receive what was promised. They just welcomed it, as a shadow.
Right.
But God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect.
Yeah.
Which there again is your focus on Jesus and what he did about bringing people together. Not only did he bring people from every tribe and from every sinful situation, but he brought people from time,
That's right,
past, and even in the future, in the present, under one church. I mean, that's just amazing. It's almost more than your mind can.
It's hard to wrap around.
Right.
So one of my other two words left, or one phrase and one word, is the last one I put on there was eternal, which you mentioned that earlier. That's a big theme in the book of Hebrews, because everything's about what you just said. Yeah. It's the what's on earth is temporary. The problem with the old covenant was, we mentioned about the law, but it was temporary. It wasn't built for eternity.
That's right.
It was built for the here, for a period of time until Jesus came. So
also another word mentioned that's, I guess, a cousin from eternity is heaven. He mentions heaven a lot, especially in chapter 11, but even chapter 1 is this picture. Does it say heaven when he says the Son, let's see, he's seated at the right hand? Yeah, in heaven, verse 3. He sat down of the majesty in heaven. But he's gonna bring that up a lot.
Right.
So,
and I think that's the idea, is it ties us together. The last phrase I had, which was kind of a key theme, I thought, just because it occurs so much, is the two words, let us. It says there's different contexts. Let us hold fast. Let us draw near. That's several times. Let us come boldly. Talking about the throne. Let us consider one another. Let us throw off sin and things that hinder and entangle. So he uses that phrase a lot as kind of a challenge phrase. These are all action steps.
Yeah.
Let us do this, let us do that. So I thought
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that was kind of the 7 key thoughts of just, and there are more, like I said.
He says in there somewhere it's impossible to keep the law. It's impossible.
Right.
What was impossible, Jesus did by one sacrifice.
Correct.
Himself.
Yeah. Well, you know how we know it's impossible, Dad? Because no human being in the history of human beings have ever kept it,
That is correct.
except for Jesus, the Son of Man.
And they keep trying to go to a work system,
Yep.
which it never did work.
Nope.
But even churches
It pointed
today,
us. It was pointing us. You want to get out of here? Let someone else put your faith in Jesus, and He'll do it for you.
Right.
but even today, churches today try to go to a work system.
They
Oh,
do.
I know
Now,
it.
they don't do it on purpose. If you asked them that, they'd say no. But now, and then they'll come up with some point that you're like, well, that sounds like a work system to me. We all have our traditions.
But you're right. It's
People
subtle.
tend to feel better if they do what's right instead of realizing you have to be right all the time. And Jesus is the one who never made a mistake. You've made plenty. They just hard for them to see it.
I remember I was talking to a church leader one time, and we were just having a conversation. He said, you know what would be a good idea? If we just, all the decisions that we make to lead our church here, if we need to write all those down and put them in a binder so that future generations won't forget them. And I remember thinking about that. And I said, I think we have that. It's called the Bible.
Yeah.
We don't really need an addendum
No.
of our leadership decision. But doesn't that show you how easy it is to gravitate towards these are going to be our things we're going to add to?
Yeah.
Oh, I remember when I was in a meeting there of the leaders, back when I guess I was considered a leader at the church, and my big grand idea, because they were trying to hire somebody, they couldn't decide on who. So I said, why don't we just cast lots? Oh, you would have thought. I think the word is, so your answer is that we should gamble? And I thought, no, I think casting lots was biblical.
It is very biblical.
But then the next thing I know, it caused such an uproar
Yeah.
because it was just so out there that I thought, number one, I need to do something else. And number two, we missed the whole point here.
Exactly.
I was like, let's rely on God.
Judas's replacement in Acts chapter 1 was chosen by the casting of lots. So I'd say it's pretty.
Well, that's where I was
It's a
getting
pretty
it from.
big
But,
one.
try to push that through at
Leave it
your
till-
next,
leave
what do
it
they
till-
call it, the next board meeting.
Next board meeting, leave it to Jace to cause trouble. So I'll close on this, Jace. We were right. Indestructible, the only place that appears in the Bible is Hebrews 7:16.
I think if you say that, you just need to say it once.
Yeah.
Jesus is indestructible. That's a profound drop mic moment.
Yeah,
So before
that'll cover it.
we'll start the next podcast into our actual study of the text. In the overtime, I'll give you my outline that I have for the study, and we'll parse that a little bit, see if you guys like it.
So the next time somebody persecutes you for following Jesus, you need to say, he's indestructible.
And so are we.
Thanks for listening to the Unashamed podcast. Help us out by rating us on iTunes. And don't miss an episode by subscribing on YouTube, and be sure to click that little bell to get notified about new episodes. And for even more content that you won't get anywhere else, subscribe to Blaze TV at blazetv.com/unashamed.